Light the Lights is a unique show starring the Crown Prince of Cabaret, Steve Ross, and Broadway producer Arthur Whitelaw. With Steve at the piano, these two pros sing and reminisce in a loving tribute to the legends of Broadway and Hollywood. Their first-hand and personal encounters with the great and famous are humorous and touching.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Ross, and may I please introduce to you my wonderful partner in musical mayhem, Mr. Arthur Whitelaw.
One of my dearest friends in life, and it was sort of my adopted grandfather, was Groucho Marx. I did a musical about them on Broadway called Minnie's Boys with Shelley Winters, and Groucho and I became really close friends. One day Groucho called me, this is a true story, called me on the phone in Beverly Hills, and he said, he used to call me Outlaw. He said, "Outlaw, what are you doing for lunch?" And I said, "Nothing." "Why?" He says, "You want to go to Hillcrest and see some Jews?" So I said, okay. So we go to Hillcrest, and we sit at the comics table at Hillcrest, where every comedian sits for lunch. And just as we sat down, we're the first at the table, George Burns walks over. And I'd known George through Groucho for many years before, and Groucho says to me under his breath, "Here comes Burns, he's going to do a joke, you wait and see, that he's going to try out on us, and if we like it, he'll tell it on the Carson show tonight." So he comes over, he doesn't even sit down, he doesn't even say hello, Arthur, or hi, Grouch. He says, "Did you hear the one about the two men on Fifth Avenue?" They meet, these two older men meet on Fifth Avenue in front of Rockefeller Center. And one says, "Harry," he says, "you don't know what just happened to me." He's Irving what? He says, "I bought a hearing aid that is so wonderful that if a bluebird on the 31st floor of the Empire State Building lands, I can hear that bluebird land." He says, "Really? What kind is it?" He says, "About 8:45. But this was a song that he loved, that Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg wrote for him.
Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia? Oh Lydia, the tattooed lady. She has eyes that folks adore so, and a torso even more. So Lydia, oh Lydia, that encyclopedia. Lydia, the queen of tattoo. On her back is the Battle of Waterloo. Beside it, the wreck of the Hesperus troop. And proudly above waves the red, white, and blue. You can learn a lot from Lydia.
When I was a kid, I worked for Alex Cohn, who was a great Broadway producer. And during the time I worked for him, I met a man who had been one of the great producers of all time on Broadway, whose name was Max Gordon. And I never forget going to see him for the first time. He was my idol. And all the books about the theater that I'd ever read, they always mentioned Max. So he had an office above the old Playhouse Theater, on 48th Street in New York, which has since been torn down. And I went to see him. And he was now about 80, 82 years old, natty little man with a stick pin and a tie and so forth. And I heard him in his office saying to his stockbroker, "Buy this, sell that, buy this, sell that. Where's that kid? Bring that kid in here." And I was 24 years old, and I come in to see him. Now, you got to get this picture. The office was so dilapidated in those years. I mean, he'd been sitting in the same office for 50 years. They probably hadn't dusted in all that time. The gray paint was peeling from the ceiling. There's dust over everything. And he says, "So you want to be a producer?" And I said, "Well, actually, I already was a producer. I produced a hit. It ran a year called Best Foot Forward. And then I just came back from London, where I opened Hildegard's one-woman show, which looks like it's going to run about a year." And he said, "Well, 33 hits. I produced 33 hits. And they're all there." I said, "That's why I'm here. I want to learn what you did so I can do it." "Yeah, it's a great business." He said, "Great business." And with that, he looked out the window. And it had started to rain outside, and the rain is drizzling down the window. And he starts to look around his office, which I'm sure he hadn't done in 50 years, and he realizes the dilapidated state that it's in. And he looked at me and said, "You know, kid, what you do on a day like this if you don't have money in the bank?" I said, "No, Mr. Gordon, what?" He says, "You jump."
You breathless hush of evening that trembles on the brink of a lovely song.
I knew Noel Coward, and he was just as funny in person as he was as a lyricist and a composer. And he was very close friends with a mutual friend of ours whose name was Jeanette Spanier. And Jeanette was the head of the House of Balmain in Paris. She was the directress. And she loved theater people, and she gave a dinner party one night for Noel with Judy Garland and Marlene Dietrich, and just the four of them. And Dietrich got there late. And so she just had dessert and coffee, but she came in with this great big LP under her arm. And Noel said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, wait, I must play this for you." And she went over to the record player, and she put it down. And she said, "Now listen, this was opening night in London." And she puts the first band on, and nothing but applause. So they all, listen. And she said, "Now this was the opening night in Berlin." More applause. "This is the opening night in Amsterdam." More applause. At which point, Coward, under his breath to Judy Garland, said, "I sure hope she doesn't play the second side."
Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. She's a bit of an ugly duckling, you must honestly confess, and the width of her seat would surely defeat her chances of success. It's a loud voice, and though it's not exactly flat, she'll need a little more than that to earn a living wage. On my knees, Mrs. Worthington, please, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage.
Well, now you're going to talk about Cole Porter.
My favorite composer, this little gentleman from Indiana. Mr. Cole Porter, I'm glad that you share that view. They tell the story that he was at the table once, and he was still a tot, doing his homework and his writing away in his copybook in those days. And he looked up at one point and asked, "Mother, where did I come from?" And she said, "Oh, the stork brought you, dear." A couple of minutes later, "And where did Father come from?" "Oh, the stork brought him too, dear." Somewhat pages of scribbling away. And where did Grandpa come from? His mother felt the need at this point to vary the explanation. "Well, he was found under a mulberry bush, dear." Very interested in that turn of events. A little while later, the lad had to go up to bed. His mother couldn't resist going over and looking in this copybook to see what her son had been writing. And this is what she saw. "After a thorough investigation, I have come to the conclusion that there has been no sexual intercourse in our family for 2 generations. Birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it. Let's do it, let's fall in love. In Spain, the best upper sets do it. Lithuanians, and let's do it, let's do it, let's fall in love. In Amsterdam, not to mention the Finns, folks in Siam do it. Now think of Siamese twins, some Argentines without means do it. People say in Boston, even beans do it. Let's do it, let's fall in love.
Vernon was a lovely man. He introduced me to the Gershwins and to Harold Arlen and to Arthur Schwartz, and one of my favorite people in life, Irving Berlin, who was really wonderful and lived to be 101. And Irving did a show called the Music Box Review every year. He built the Music Box Theater, which still stands there today. I had a play in it once called Sweet Sue with Mary Tyler Moore and Lynn Redgrave. And Irving was still alive in those years. And really, he'd call the box office every day. He was 100 years old to see how many tickets we'd sold. With all that money. Can you imagine that? Anyway, Irving wrote this great song, and it took Fred Astaire to make it a big hit.
Strolling up the avenue so happy, all dressed up just like an English chappie, done up like a $1,000,000 trooper, trying hard to look like, oh, thank God you came. Have you seen the well-to-do up and down Park Avenue on that famous thoroughfare, with their noses in the air, high hats and arrow collars, white spats and lots of dollars, spending every dime on a wonderful time? If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits, putting on the Ritz? Different types of wear a day coat, pants with stripes and cutaway coat, perfect fits, putting on the Ritz, strolling on the avenue so happy, all dressed up just like an English chappie. Let's mix with Rockefellers, walk with sticks and umbrellas in their midst, putting on the Ritz.